guys, here come the dollies. They got fresh sinkers, hot coffee, and the sweetest smile.
Welcome back to the Clubmobile, everybody. We're so happy to have you joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again.
Joining us this morning is our friend and 100th Bomb Group historian, Matt Mabe. This is going to be a bit of a different episode from what we usually do, but Matt, thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Of course, happy to be here.
We might have stolen you a little bit from Matt Leach. We know you're always on the Nearly Men podcast, but Matt, if you ask nicely, we'll give him back.
I think we've interviewed about everyone there is from Masters of the Air that can be on their podcast. So you're probably not stealing me at this point.
It's fine. If there's like a ransom, we're willing to negotiate.
We're happy to have stolen you for the morning. Definitely.
Today we're going to be talking about the Bremen mission that took place on October 8th, 1943. Matt, could you give us a brief outline of the mission itself and the consequences?
Sure. That was what we didn't know at the time was really the start of Black Week. That was the first of one of the, most difficult missions that occurred during that week-long period. But it was October 8th, 1943, targeting the German submarine pens at Bremen, which, when you look at it on a map, isn't necessarily the longest target, but proved to be one of the most difficult. And it's one that I think they obviously found out how difficult it was going to be right when they actually reached the target, and really pandemonium broke out. But it was a tough one for the 100th. It was a tough one for the 8th Air Force in general. But 19 planes went up, and as you probably know, 7 did not make it back. So it had significant consequences for the group, and is one that, for the guys who did survive, really left an indelible mark based on what they saw that day.
It's extremely, when you read into it, it's extremely haunting knowing that many went up and then that many men did not return. Even though the raid itself was depicted on screen, it was sort of alluded to. There wasn't any, physical scenes in the show. And one of the crews that Gabby and I have really looked into is the Blakely crew.
I think the reason it's true, yeah, we have been looking into the Blakely crew a lot. And I think the reason that it really gripped us is because you don't know what happens at first, right? And I know that we were talking TV magic, and Apple, had all sorts of plans. And I'm sure it boiled down to what was going to be more of a gripping moment to see, 7 planes go down over Bremen, or to see, I always say, or to see Rosie alone in the sky, right? Which one was really going to pull people in, Bremen or that moment during Munster where he's up there alone in the sky? And I definitely think that moment, yes, it was gripping, but there was so much about Bremen, right, Winnie, that we always say was like missing, that we wanted to read into. And we didn't find out about it until we started reading books like Frank Murphy's book, Lucky's book, where you really get somebody else's kind of perspective of what was going on up there. So what we kind of find out initially in Masters of the Air is that they don't make it back. Blakely's crew doesn't make it back. And then at the start of the next episode, they appear like three war heroes, and oh my God, they're alive, they're here. And they definitely sustained incredible damages and challenges on the way back. What we do know is that they crash landed, right, at a dummy airfield, right? It was a dummy airfield in Ludham.
It was at an RAF field, which had a short runway.
A short runway. Okay, so I'm incorrect, guys. It's not a dummy airfield. It's just a very short runway.
But one that wasn't made for bombers by any stretch.
Okay, so it wasn't made for bombers. That makes sense. Did they make it to the IP ahead of being thrown out of formation? Like, did they get to drop their bombs at all?
They did, and it was shortly after that when they really got hit. And Crosby talks about it in his book, and Crosby has a lot of climactic buildup the way he tells it in his book. But when you read the actual mission report, that's what happened as well. And the flak broke out, and he gives a lot of credit to Jim Douglas, a bombardier, for maintaining that focus and keeping them on target to drop their bombs. But it's right after that really all hell kind of breaks loose.
Wow.
How long did they kind of limp back? Because I know that obviously they took the decision rather than bailing out, or rather than inflating the dinghy, because it was ripped to shreds, right? How long did they limp back all the way to England? How long would have that have taken them?
It was a little over an hour flight time, but that's where it's really a credit to Blakely and to Crosby for running the numbers in real time in their head. There was no GPS to tell you exactly like what the timeline was going to look like.
Yeah.
So they had looked at the numbers and they looked at the damage and felt like they could press on. And I think at one point Blakely has the plane flying at 100 miles an hour and it stalls at 90. So I mean,
Wow.
it literally is one of those wing and a prayer kind of moments, as the title says. Um,
Mm,
and then that truly is why they're throwing everything out of the plane that they can, because every, you know, every 50 feet that you can, gain in altitude, that's a better chance that you're going to make it back. So it really was coming down to the wire for them. They probably couldn't have gone much further at that point.
yeah.
I had read somewhere, and I don't know how true this is, that I know they dumped whatever they could as far as weight from the plane, that they flew home in their socks. They dumped their shoes.
They started dumping the heavy flight clothing and stuff like that, because
Right.
at that point you're not flying at
Yeah.
altitude. So
At
any
that
of
point,
that
you're all the way
stuff,
down. But
and it's probably soaked with sweat, so it probably does weigh a fair
mm,
bit. So any of that stuff you're throwing out. But I mean, that gives you an idea when you're throwing out like the heavy thermos. I mean, like every pound counts at that point. So it's
yeah.
I mean, it's pretty incredible.
I don't know where we read that, Gabby, that they came back to Thorpe Abbots with no shoes on. They just came
Yeah.
back
I wish I
in
could
their
remember where I
socks.
read that. I think I get so
Um,
I dive down rabbit holes and I get so into things that I'm like, I don't sometimes stop to make a note of where I'm reading it and what
yeah,
the
from
source
where it
is.
was.
So
It's certainly plausible, and I know the series kind of adds some climactic buildup with you don't know if they made it back yet,
Yeah,
right.
which is pretty much what happened. They didn't. There's no indications that they used the phone from Ludham to call. They had trucks bring them back to the base, and when they arrive at the main gate, it's like, oh my God, look who's back.
yeah.
So, and I think
Right.
it's Egan was one of the first to actually meet the crew when they came back, to
Oh,
much to his utter shock that they made it.
yeah,
Wow. I would imagine, especially, he's probably pacing the floors waiting for Buck to come back. That's his best friend. And
yeah,
he's hoping, right? You would imagine he's hoping that Buck and DeMarco are on the other truck, and they're not. So, which I guess ties into the other half of the Bremen mission, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
we'll
Yeah,
get there
and if
after
you th
this.
and if you think about it too, like the odds of it, just try to encapsulate the shock that someone would have. You figure by the next, like by a few hours later, if somebody hasn't come back, they're not coming back. So to have somebody come back the next day is just like a divine moment almost, because obviously the only way they made it back was how they did, crash landing somewhere else. But the odds of making it to that point are just so low. So you really would feel like somebody's been brought back from the dead practically when they show up the next day.
Very much like seeing a
Yeah.
ghost, I would imagine. Yeah.
Probably very haunting. Um,
Yeah.
Another thing that the show did not depict was that it was Jack Kidd in the command pilot seat, right? Or the co-pilot seat. Um, but he isn't seen to be coming back with them in the show.
That's right.
How often would Kidd fly with this crew? Because this then put co-pilot Charlie Villa in the tail. Am I correct?
That's right. I believe Kid only flew one prior mission with them. And I guess it's one of those things where it's one of those dramatic omissions where, one of the challenges of the Masters of the Air is trying to focus on too many people, trying to tell too many stories. So I think it might have got a little confusing if you add Jack Kidd into that mix. But having said that, I mean, the real Jack Kidd story is incredible, because it wasn't one where he was just coming along as the command pilot. I mean, all of these guys have the highest level of respect for Jack Kidd. Even I talked to John Luckadoo about this years ago, and he said, of all the guys I respect, like Jack Kidd is at the top of that pedestal because like just a phenomenal officer and a guy who had superb judgment and was a guy it was like Buck Clevin. It's a guy that you would feel confident flying with. So I know they felt great confidence having Kidd with them that day.
Yeah.
Who discovered them at Ludham? Was there, I mean, I'm assuming there was a full staff of people working there, like that it took them till the next day to come back, or were they there for a while on their own before somebody figured out, oh my God, there's a bomber here that's not supposed to be here.
I can't remember.
It's
I'm
pretty
getting
beat up.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm getting this from Crosby's book or the mission report, but it seems like they were there for a few minutes before, folks were dispatched out there to find out. And then obviously at that point, as soon as it's determined that wounded or is severely wounded are on board, they
Mhm.
call for the ambulances that they come out and take the wounded men away. So it's not that long, but it's also not a case where like the ambulances knew they were coming and they were waiting there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so it is tough. You do hit the ground and then, there's still a severe emergency even though you've hit the ground because you have, wounded men and obviously Saunders didn't make it that day.
He was the
Yeah.
only member of the crew, correct, that did not survive that mission.
That's right. And even though Charlie Villa survived, I mean, his wounds were pretty severe. So the guys that were wounded, I mean, these were severe wounds. Yevich
Mhm.
had a compound fracture with his bone sticking out. Villa had been bleeding profusely, and guys like Bill McClellan survived just utterly by the skin of their teeth. So
Wow.
it was tough.
Yeah. I know that there is a story in Cros's book and in the mission report where it says that flak came through the nose and hit the bombardier. Um, but I can never find a Purple Heart for Jim Douglas for that mission. It's only for a previous mission. So in terms of like awards, promotions, and stuff like that, was everything correct, or have some things been sort of missed off for reasons?
I think they have been well addressed. I'd have to go back and look individually, but I mean, there were 3 Silver Stars awarded, DFCs awarded. Uh, Rightly so, Charlie Villa and Saunders were given the Distinguished Service Cross. And it's worth noting that DSC isn't necessarily something they give out just because, like in Saunders' case, that he was killed in action. It was because the man was literally at his gun firing as he was wounded. So it's a
Yeah.
true recognition of heroic actions on his part. So I think, it is very fitting that certain awards were bestowed on members of the
Yeah.
crew that day.
I think one of the most admirable things that I've read about the entire mission was that, yes, Saunders was at his gun and he actually got the the guy that got him. He took him down
Yeah.
right before he um was done for, which I find extremely admirable. Um, do you wish that the mission had been depicted on screen, or would you have thought it would have been too much for people to have seen?
It's tough. I guess my thought is if it had been told in a certain way, perhaps, but I think it's tough. You risk with a series like that. If you show too many battle sequences, it does take away from some of the dialogue that you can have on the ground because I think unlike Band of Brothers where you can show guys in a foxhole in a battle conversing, it's much harder to show that in a plane and have that same level of audience connection. So, um, I think the way while it would have been interesting to see a little bit of that, especially some more of the what happened to the Blakely crew, um, I think it was told in a compelling way to at least draw you in from a dramatic standpoint. So
Yeah,
you were surprised when they came back, and you were surprised when you later find out Buck survived.
yeah,
I think that's part of the reason why we jumped so hard at finding out more, because all of a sudden, they're back, and you know, Harry Crosby's got such an incredible story and Rebecca says it all the time, he worked so hard to become the navigator that he was. He studied and studied, and he didn't want to be the reason that his buddies, got killed. And I think seeing them come back from the Bremen mission on screen, I think it triggered something for me where I was like, okay, this guy was good, right? Because Masters of the Air was my very first introduction to the 100th, to the 8th Air Force, and I was like, this guy was good. What else is out there? What else can I find out? And that's when I started like just right down the rabbit hole. But it really is a testament to his ethic, his work ethic, right? His I think his knowledge and the amount of time and training that the Blakely crew put in to being such a good crew that Crosby was able to get them home. But every time I watch that moment, I always think of, I could hear Rebecca in the back of my head saying, he studied so hard and he gives credit to, everybody that he trained with, and he didn't want to be the reason his friends got killed.
I think that's an important point. This mission, when you look back, it represented the pinnacle of their training in the sense that um, had Crosby not, developed that skill, they might not have gotten back. Had Blakely not developed that skill as a pilot, they might not have gotten back. Douglas over the target, staying focused, hitting the target despite what was going on, and then rightfully so, Blakely in kind of the one interview he gives that his son recorded in the 80s, he talks about it was the gunners, and it was the pinnacle of their training. Their training had truly paid off because, as he said, we got them before they got us. And it was actually kind of almost painful for Blakely to go into that detail even 40 years later, just thinking back of the horrors of what happened. But you're right, it's everyone did their job and they did it very well that day, and that's why they served. Blakely chalks it up to luck, which of course luck is part of it, but training was a huge piece of why they made it back.
Yeah, because he had them up on practice flights any chance that he could. So all of that flight time absolutely paid off. And then that interview you just mentioned, you get Gabby and I have watched it a couple of times, and you sort of see the pain on his face as he has to discuss it. And I believe at the end he says, "And I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm done
As
with that."
as
Yeah.
he takes a swig of a Miller High Life, yes.
Yes.
But I mean yeah, it was hard. It was hard. It's going down that rabbit hole would have been hard for him, I think.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think I've seen a short interview with Bill McClellan too, and Bill talks about some of this stuff kind of in a little bit of superficial way, but I think it's tough with all these guys when you get to that point and when you're talking about Bremen and you did want to go beneath the surface. I think it's hard because of that was a tough day for those guys. Really
Yeah.
tough day.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there is an artifact pertaining to the Blakely crew, and we are so curious as to
You've
what
had
that
us on the edge
is.
of our
Yeah, I
seats
think you'd
all
like to see
week.
this. And I'm giving this podcast the white glove treatment because this artifact I actually want to give it the utmost care in showing it to you here.
No way.
We've
Um,
been on the edge of our seats all week.
I'll try to see how I can show this. So it's hard to see, but so this is Bill McClellan's jacket that he was wearing. And sorry, it's a little crinkly sounding because it's got
No,
it's
it's
stored in a
fine.
box with archival paper. But
Wow.
um, so what's special is kind of over where my fingers tapping. It's hard to see over here, but you can still see the bullet holes, the flak holes that are in his jacket,
Oh
and
my God.
there's blood stains from the hole on the right side. But you see these things and you look at like an
Yeah.
artifact in a museum and think, that tells a quite a
Yeah.
story. And you just look at it and wonder like, what this guy went through and what this jacket has seen if it could talk.
My
That's
God.
amazing.
And it's a pretty small jacket. I've seen a lot of jackets that are like
Yeah.
size 42.
It's little.
This is a size 38 A2 jacket. It's pretty small.
So McClellan was a tiny fella.
Yeah, he was a small guy.
They all had to be. Like, now that I've been in a
You've been
B-17,
in a
they
B-17.
had to be. They
I've
had
yet
to
to be
be
in one, but
on the smaller side because I struggled to get through the I was trying to get to the nose, and I had to crawl through, and then I had to like hold myself down to shuffle through. So I don't know how these men did that as many days as they did, because even 10 minutes I felt suffocated. I stood in the nose for 2 minutes and I'm like, oh, I don't like this. And then the bombardier seat is so tiny as well. I didn't think it would be so little. Um But yeah,
It's small.
they had to be tiny
And then you
fellas.
picture that moving around and bouncing around and stuff hitting
Right.
him.
And
Yeah.
having to sit on it for hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, but yeah, we're very grateful that Bill's family entrusted us with that jacket, so it will be part of our historical display that we'll have down in Savannah. But it's thankfully been preserved and treated in a way that has preserved the leather. So
It's
it doesn't have
beautiful.
any art on it, but it doesn't need any art because it
It
tells
doesn't
Right.
need any.
another story.
Yes,
So
Yeah.
absolutely it does.
I mean, I saw so many of those jackets of the A2 jackets when I was at the museum in Thorpe Abbotts, and it's just amazing that, you know, you see all of them and you wonder, it's hard to tell, right? Like which jacket belonged to who and who might have come home. And that's the thing that hit me, I think, at one point. I said, how many of the guys that wore these jackets came home or were POWs and then came home? And I feel like the jackets itself really tells a story of the guy that wore it. It really is
Mm.
their lasting story. If nobody's going to sit on a podcast like we are and dig and tell these stories, you have these incredible artifacts that will tell a story for you.
you're right.
Which,
And at John Brady's jacket, John was wearing his jacket when he was shot down at Munster and wore his jacket all through Stalag Luft 3 on the forced
Yeah.
march. So it's when you see that jacket now, it's like, wow, yeah, you know, what a story of where this jacket's been.
It went
is
through
that
so
in
much.
Savannah as well?
It will be eventually, we hope. So
Winnie,
another
add that to
very
our list.
Yeah, adding, got it.
Yes.
In terms of after the mission for the Blakely crew, were they given any kind of R&R? I know that they were promoted, but I'm not entirely sure what they were promoted to do. I know that Blakely stayed until the end of the war. Am I correct?
With
And
Cross,
Crosby
right?
also stayed,
Yeah,
but I
that's
don't
right.
know about the others.
So I don't have the exact date Jim Douglas left, but Jim became Group Bombardier. So Jim Douglas did stick around, and which so that's certainly accurate in Masters of the Air in terms of him being there. Blakely stayed on and eventually became the station training officer at Thorpe Abbotts.
Oh,
So this,
wow.
I think in Blakely's case, he had so many chances to go home, but it became one of those guys that he felt compelled to, you know, stay with the men.
Yeah.
And keep contributing, and that's what he did. So he and Crosby and Douglas are really an anomaly in terms of sticking around and staying with it. And then the guys that were wounded, those guys all came back stateside after that because of the severity of their wounds.
Yeah.
I know in Crosby's book, he talks about getting to the final mission. You know, I'm there. This was my final one. And then he ends up staying through the end of the war. And he flies a lot even after being promoted to group navigator. Was that the same case for Blakely and Douglas? Did they fly occasionally as well? Did they have to continue to get missions under their belt at that point in their promotions, or, you know, where they were sitting, I guess, in operations?
I don't recall off the top of my head how many missions Blakely flew in total, but Douglas would have continued flying as Group Bombardier on certain missions. He would have much like Crosby in terms of the nature of the mission would have warranted
Right.
the Group Bombardier going.
Could I ask a question? This is just something I've read multiple times. Is that Douglas was grounded because of an injury he sustained during Bremen. So is
Yeah.
that inaccurate?
That's out there a lot.
I'll have to go
It's a
fact check
lot.
that. I'll admit I don't know everything off
Please,
the top of my head,
because
but
it's it's
I'll find
confusing
out.
because in one
He
thing it says that he's grounded because he's hurt his hand so badly. And then in other things you read, he carries on flying as Group Bombardier, which makes more sense.
Yeah.
But they say that he injures his hand. But there is a picture in a version of Cros's book where both hands look, he stood in front of the wreckage of Justice Knappen, and both his hands look fine.
Yeah, I would wager the answer is somewhere in the middle there in terms of any wounds he did have. He was, cared for and treated and given some time to recover, but he pressed on because he was still there in
That's
45
just that guy.
doing his
Yeah.
job.
Yeah. Um, on the other side of the mission, we had our baby, which was Buck Levin and Benny DeMarco. Again, it was depicted in the show, but I feel like it kind of left you on a cliffhanger if you did not know. Because I tried my best to not read into anything while I was watching the show as it premiered week by week.
Same.
So I was sat crying thinking that Buck Cleven and Benny DeMarco were no more. Could you give us like a brief outline of what they went through? I know it's very similar to what Blakely's crew went through, but they got shot down and were made POWs. Where
And
did they land?
it's also one that I wish they could have explored the backstory a little more, because in reality, Cleven and DeMarco did hit it off and were pals. And within the crew itself, DeMarco was very good friends with Francis Harper, the bombardier, um, who isn't really featured in the series, but it was a tight-knit crew. It was a good crew, a very skilled crew. Um, but yeah, they were flying in the low squadron with Cleven coming along as the squadron CO. And then again, much like the Blakely crew, right after the bomb run, their planes hit. The difference is, unlike just a snap, and these guys, our baby took on a lot more damage, and it was not sustainable to carry on. So Buck did give a similar order of throw everything out you can, lighten the load. But I think at that point they realized they weren't going to make it. So that's when the crew is able to successfully bail out, and then at the very end, DeMarco and Cleven kind of do the after you and the Bombay, and both go out, and several of the guys are reunited on the ground, but there was really no chance for them to try to limp their plane back to England at that point.
Yeah.
So they
I
fell
remember
right
reading.
into Germany. I mean, there was not even
Yes.
they weren't even close to being home. They fell right into Germany.
Yeah,
They had no shot.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Didn't Buck Cleven literally fall into a farmhouse, and then the farmer himself kind of stuck a rake in Cleven,
That
and it
was
was
his
like
story,
inches
that
away
he
from
that he
stabbing
came
him?
right in the front door of the farmhouse while the mom was making dinner or making lunch or something, and the farmer has a pitchfork up to his throat. So
God.
um, he was not able to talk his way out of that one.
Yeah.
Quite polite of him to use the front door, at least.
Yeah, at least he
Yeah.
used the front
At least
door.
he used
That's
the front door.
exactly it.
Yeah.
Were they able to drop their bombs, or was it instantly they were hit and they had to bail right away?
They when I was going back through Skip Thayer's narrative of the war, he did say they did make it to the bomb drop, and they remember seeing Blakely's plane being hit and falling out of formation. So it was shortly after that their plane got it as well. The only slight difference with how their crew configuration was set up is Thayer usually flies as the co-pilot, but since Cleven was on board, in their case, they actually didn't need Thayer. They didn't need him to fly as the formation officer in the tail. Um, and Thayer said, "No, no. If there's room for me on the plane, I want to go." And Cleven said, "Well, we could always use an extra gun, and for official purposes, we'll list you as the squadron photographic officer for this mission." So Thayer they had a camera, so I can only imagine what was on that camera if it had survived.
Wow.
But he was down in
Wow.
the nose section of the plane, so a fateful choice for him, because he thought he was logging another mission, which he did, but it was obviously his last.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, I can only imagine he lived with a lot of what if, I didn't have to go. What if I didn't go? I would have, but I feel like the vibe, I hate to use that word, the vibe, the way a lot of these men operated and felt was that, if my buddies are going, I'm going too, if we, kind of an all for one and one for all type of mentality, which is so admirable and just not anything you see today, which is terrible.
Yeah.
That's
Really?
basically right. Those guys, I think, especially amongst the DeMarco crew, had certain
Mhm.
experiences with one another during training, and at Thorpe Abbott said it brought them close together. So I don't think Thayer was going to miss the chance if it came up.
Yeah.
And if he'd have stayed, it would have been a situation of, I guess, some survivor's guilt. He
Yeah.
said that he could have
Sure.
gone and he would have chosen not to. It would have been, he would have felt guilty, I think. And his friends have been shot down and he ended up escaping that. So I think in some ways it was like a lose-lose for him. If he'd have stayed, he'd have felt guilty. and then he has gone, and it would have been a what if
Yeah.
situation.
And
Did anyone from that
he
go
didn't
ahead?
say
Sorry.
this on he didn't say this on paper, but I think too it was the same thing of like flying with Jack Hitt, flying with Buck Clevin gave you confidence. So you figured
Yeah,
Yeah.
If Buck Clevin's going, and it gives me a little more
then I
confidence
should
than I
go.
might normally have.
Yeah,
So let's do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did anyone from that crew perish on this raid?
No, they made it out. They
All of
made
them
it
made it
out.
They
out.
all became
And they
POWs, right?
were they all sent to the same POW camp? Were they able to stay together, or did they sort of disperse into different
The
areas?
officers stay, the enlisted men know, but I don't know which camps all of the enlisted men went to, but the officers all stayed together. And we're at Stalag Luft 3. So at one point they Harper was in a different part of the camp than DeMarco was, which was unfortunate, but they all did make
Yeah,
it to Stalag Luft 3.
Yeah, I remember
yeah,
reading that in Frank Murphy's book that even though they were all at Stalag Luft 3, they would occasionally see each other, but they weren't all bunked together. It wasn't as it was on screen where you see,
yeah.
every guy from the 100th in one hut. And then Murphy talks about they were given the opportunity to relocate so that they could be all together. And the good soul that he was wouldn't leave because he didn't want to leave his bandmates
He
in the
didn't want to
lurch.
leave the
So
band.
he ended up
Yeah.
spending the rest of his time at Stalag Luft 3, separated from everybody else from the 100th. I always say that's a testament to Murphy's character. Like, what a guy.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
I think it's interesting how they just depict them all together in the show. And I know it's,
Yeah.
again, TV magic, but that they weren't really all they weren't all roommates through their time as POWs, which is very interesting,
Yeah.
that they were like
I
separated.
really like I really like that though, because in terms of the real men, I feel like they might have as much as you can like a situation like that, I feel like that would have been the ideal situation,
Oh,
to
of
be with
course.
your friends through this horrific time. So I like how they did that, even though I know it was for TV magic and to push the story along. I do feel as if it might have been good for them.
Yeah.
Another thing that is depicted on screen right before this mission is ground crew Kenny Lemons fixing something right before Clevin takes off. Did that happen right before the Bremen mission, or was that a completely different situation?
It was a different mission with Lemons fixing the Magneto, and it's funny,
Yeah,
you can get sucked into all the online critics of people saying crazy stuff, and naturally you had people saying that's a bunch of Hollywood magic, like that never happened, that's ridiculous, no one could ever do that. You even had people that were mechanics saying that could never happen, but the irony is it did happen. And Ken Lemons is by no means one to embellish his experiences. It's a man who could have, but he never did. He's as humble as can be. So that did happen. It just didn't happen on the Bremen mission. It was another plane called Shihasta from the
Mhm.
351st Squadron, but that did happen. And it's funny. Lemons talked about like the reason why he did that, and part of the reason behind it, I think, is just as interesting. And it was because on the mission where that really did happen, it was a maximum effort mission, and the guys knew from the ground that if they had to go back to the CO and say like, "Hey, two of our planes couldn't fly because they were beat up and we couldn't fix them in time," that's reflects really poorly. So Lemons basically said like, "I did not want to let the squadron down. I was determined that if that plane could fly, we get it in the
Right.
air." And even after that happened, he didn't want to tell the CO because he was scared he'd get in trouble for that. So it's just kind of an unsung hero with integrity doing what needed to be done.
I
yeah.
thought it was very kismet that the 100th actually shared that clip on their Instagram, on their socials yesterday. I saw it when I was getting ready to leave for work yesterday, and I said, "Oh my God." I said, "Do they know we're talking about, do
Do
they
they
know
know
we're
we're doing
talking
this?
about this tomorrow?"
Well, that was
Did
me.
Matt
So
tell
yes.
them?
Yeah. Well, that was me
See,
posting it. So I
Ah!
there you
that's
go.
but I
There it
actually
is.
I was going back through the tapes, and so he recorded some audio cassette tapes um, back in the 90s when he was doing his book, and there's only a portion of it that's really clear quality, and even the one we posted, I had to kind of wash out the background noise. But
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
it's beautiful to hear him talk about those things. And then when I stumble upon that one clip of him doing the, Airman's Hymn, I just thought that was
That was
quite,
Yeah.
beautiful.
quite moving because it's a representative of the fact that Ken and those guys really cared deeply for the cruise, and I think Bremen was one of those missions where when the guys didn't come back, like man, it hit them hard, and it
Yeah.
doesn't go into it in the series, but the other guy that's there with him, that played by Sam Jordan, John Herman. What really happened after Bremen is John was devastated because he was the crew chief for Piccadilly Lily, and that didn't come
Yeah.
back, and John was just in tears. It was
Yeah.
probably the most devastating moment of his life that day.
Yeah.
So it was tough for the guys in the air, but it was tough for the guys on the ground too.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially after they had, taken such care of the planes and therefore taken such good care of the men,
Yeah.
um, that they're gonna feel some kind of guilt. A very cheeky question it is, do you know if Lemon's book is ever gonna come back into publication?
I
Because
was
I
gonna
am
say,
dying to
I'm
read it.
dying to read that, and I,
It
we have
it
to go
is.
back.
So we're going back, and it's interesting. I think there's a few more stories that didn't make it to the book because, as I understand it, even when he published that in 1999, he was trying to hurry and have it published in time for the reunion. So that's why it
Oh,
was done a little bit hastily at the end. But
yeah,
I want to say there were only 200 copies of the book that were made at that time,
yeah.
Yeah.
and so it's right behind me. It's a
He says
small
no big
it's
deal.
a small book, and Ken
Yeah.
signed
Yeah.
each one of the original copies, so they were
Oh,
pretty rare. But yes, we are
yeah.
working to go back and retype the
Yes.
manuscript, correct a few things, add what
Yeah.
more can be added, and then hopefully get that printed. It's a shorter book, so it won't be that hard, but
Mhm.
it's a bit of a lift to get a book off the ground. But it's one that ever since it came out,
Gosh.
people have been saying, "Where's this book?" And
Yeah.
even Rafferty Law has been as nice as can be, has said so many nice things about Ken in interviews and on social media, and how
Yeah.
much the book meant to him during that process too.
Because I know that we discussed within our little group when we were all going to go to Thorpe Abbott's together back in the spring, um, that there was a copy somewhere in the Norwich library, and we all said, why don't we all go take it in turns and read a paragraph and pass it around so we all get
We
to
were gonna
read
go to Norwich
Ken
and read it.
Lemon's book together
And then didn't one of
while
our
we were
friends find it at the Library of Congress or something?
yes,
A copy of it is at
yes.
the Library of
And
Congress.
they just sat and read
She
the
sat
entire
and read
thing
it
and
for a whole day.
gave
She
a
sat in there all day.
synopsis.
It's
We
sad
were
that it's
like,
come
wait,
down to
take
that. That
pictures.
you
Yeah,
have
I
to get
said
it
send
through like
pictures.
Yeah.
yeah. It's too bad
It
that
was
it's come
either,
down to having to get it through like interlibrary loan, but I think that's even more
yeah,
reason why I think it's important to
it,
get back out because to
absolutely.
my knowledge as well, it's the only book written by one of the guys from the ground crew at Thorpe Abbott. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
It
We'll
would
see, we'll see
it
what
would
we can
be
do.
an excellent addition to our
Yeah.
collection because
Oh
we have
yes.
pretty much everybody's now, and I think
I think
we're only missing Kenny's.
almost
I
everybody's.
think
I think John Clark is going to be in
John
the,
Clark's
the
is the
the
only
the
one.
first rotation of the book club for 2026.
Yeah,
So that'll be nice since we read Marie's book on the last one.
yeah.
And I'm trying to nudge
Um.
Raf Wall to see if he can write a short little intro for the reprint of
Oh,
Ken's book.
Oh, that would be
please.
wonderful.
That
Fingers
would be
crossed. We'll
very
see.
sweet.
That would
Um,
be really nice.
before we finish, I recall that you mentioned there was a story about Clevin and DeMarco. Was it after the war? You
Yeah,
mentioned this very briefly, but again, it's a story that we would love to hear about.
it's a story that really resonated with me. I've gotten to know DeMarco's son John very well, and DeMarco did not talk about the war much. He did not go to reunions. But for whatever reason, he had such a close relationship with Buck Clevin that that's really the only relationship he maintained from the 100th after the war. And when DeMarco retired, he went to go visit Clevin many times. But what John had told me is that every October 8th, on the anniversary of that mission, uh, Clevin and DeMarco would call each other. And, that was like the one time they would reminisce about those events. And so when DeMarco passed away in 1992, at that time he had finally opened up to his son John about the experiences he'd been through. And so when he passed away that year, John, in place of his dad, called Buck to, reminisce about, on behalf of his dad, to mark
That's very sweet.
that
So
occasion. So
sweet.
it's interesting because both Clevin and DeMarco are guys that they didn't really come to reunions. They played such an important role in the group, but
Yeah.
I think their war experience just weighed on them so heavily that
Mhm.
it was tough to revisit those at
Yeah.
times.
And I think in Buck's case, he lost his wife Marge incredibly early, and then he lost his friend Bucky Egan also incredibly
Yeah.
prematurely. So I feel like it would have brought back too much on top of all these events that took place after the war in a very short space of time. As much as I wish that they had maintained more relationships with each other, because I feel like they're the only ones that would understand what they would all be going through. So to sort of keep that to yourself must have been extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Um, have
And
have you
and
had? Sorry, go
I was gonna say
ahead.
DeMarco never came to reunion, but Buck did come to a couple, and at one of his last ones, it took
Mm,
some nudging. It took urging from the guys who had been there with him to get him back to come. So he came to a reunion in the 90s, which was his last. And there's a nice photo of Rosie with his arm locked around Clevin. And from the folks that were there had told us at the time, Rosie had said something to the effect of, "You want to see a real hero? Don't look at me. Look at this guy." So a really nice.
oh,
Who wouldn't have wanted to be a fly on the wall for that moment? So very nice.
That's
yeah.
incredible.
I was gonna ask if you have had anyone randomly appear at a reunion when they hadn't been to any previous, and then 30, 40 years later they randomly cropped up. Have you had anything like that happen?
Yeah, there were a few, I mean, it obviously doesn't happen anymore, but there were all kinds of stories of that happening back in the day, and it's pretty wild. And even now, it's happened a little bit in the sense of I've reached out to a lot of people, and
Yeah.
I mean, just one story, for instance, Ron Bailey's son, who Ron was on Rosie's crew. I
Yeah.
connected with him during the filming of Masters of the Air, and it said, it'd be great to have you at a reunion and, in honor of your dad. And so in 2021 at our reunion, a guy came up to me at the bar and said, hey, I'm Greg Bailey. And I was like, oh my God, like
Wait a
we haven't
minute.
spoken in a year and you just showed up out of the blue. So
Just popped
I,
out.
I think that's happened to the veterans too. You had guys
Yeah.
that finally, just for whatever reason, decided to show up.
Yeah. Just incredibly sweet.
That's
I really
incredible.
like that.
I
I
think it's
really like
incredible, and it's a testament to the strength of the 100th that their children now still get together and do these
that.
reunions
Yes.
and keep the legacy of their fathers alive. And their mothers. There's a handful of men, as our listeners know, whose wives were also part of the war effort. They really keep this era going, and I think it's so important because especially now we live in a time where we need to pay attention to history. We need to understand it, and we need to give it the credit that it deserves. I think that's just the way we need to carry on.
Yeah, I agree.
For sure. Yeah. And it was nice at our last reunion, John DeMarco came to honor his dad. And John, I get emotional just saying it. Sorry. John came up to me at the end and said, I wish it hadn't taken me this long to get here. So,
Mm,
but it's, I think, a testament to the events we put on that people have that response that,
yeah.
you're not sure what you're getting into when you come to this, but then you realize it is kind of a big family that even though you don't know anybody, you actually do know everybody just about. So
Right.
Yeah. I feel like Gabby, when we go to whichever one comes next, we're gonna be just very emotional for 3 days.
Yeah.
Just ignore us, Matt. We'll just be stood crying for 2.5 days. It's fine.
We're gonna pack our coffee, our donuts, and the Kleenex. That's
I don't know.
that's it.
But I think you raised a good point, and it's, years ago, the reunions for just the veterans were like, hey, let's hang out and have some drinks and like go on a tour of the town while we're in Cincinnati or whatever. But now,
Yeah.
with the veterans, not here in force, we do structure these around historical talks, historical events, so that you get something out of this and learn a bit more, and hopefully it plants a seed of people wanting to learn more when they go home.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
which is excellent. We Gabby and I recently got two reunion booklets. We found them through one of the Facebook groups, and looking at the itinerary for like 1970 something compared to the itinerary that you guys had the previous reunion is it's two different worlds. The ones that we have, it's dinner, golf, church, lunch, go home.
A visit to an airfield, men only.
Men only, yeah.
Yeah,
And
men
then in
only.
comparison to this new, in comparison to the most recent one, it was Dan Rosenthal talking about his father, and then you've got the POW talks. Like, just comparatively, it's
The reunions
worlds
seem to have
apart.
grown so much. You
Yeah.
guys really,
They were social gatherings at that time,
Yeah.
understandably. And I remember one of the veterans telling me, he said, my wife was a good lady. I loved her deeply, but she didn't enjoy going to reunions because of that. Like, if you don't enjoy those kind of things, it's not fun for you. So this guy
right.
was
Yeah.
disappointed that his wife wasn't more excited about those things back then. But I think a lot of these guys were so blessed to have a spouse that truly understood what they went through and truly understood how much those events meant to them and were a source of healing. So you had uh, some fantastic wives of the 100 that were along for the ride on these events.
And we're excited to learn more about them as we
Yes.
carry on. We have a
Everybody
long
has a
list.
story. Yeah.
Everybody has a
Yes.
story. It's true.
And we would love the opportunity to tell it should we get the correct permissions. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. And we've also actually learned something today, which
Yes.
was again the goal, and we're really excited to share it with everyone who listens, and hopefully they get the same bug that we do and start diving headfirst into this mission.
Yeah. All I can say is just buy a book, right? Buy Harry Crosby's book, buy Frank Murphy's book, buy John Le Carreu's book. Just start with one. I promise any of you that haven't read them yet, you're gonna want to read more, because
Yes,
that's how I feel. I'm running out of room on my bookshelf,
as am
and
I.
and as I look around my apartment daily, I go, where can I put another one?
I've run out of space here, too. So.
In my tiny little one bedroom in Brooklyn, where can I put
Where can I put more
another
books?
bookshelf? But just start with one book, and you'll definitely want to keep going, because everybody sees it differently through their own eyes, and it's nice to see it kind of come together as a whole, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Matt.
Sure.
Thank
Great
you,
to see you.
Matt. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will catch you next time in the Clubmobile. Bye.
Bye, everyone.